Okay, for today, I'm going to be talking about Lost Season 1, Episode 10, Raised by Another. This is the first flashback episode we get for Claire. It's actually one of the few flashback episodes we get for Claire. I think really like one of two, technically three, because she has this episode in Season 2. She has maternity leave, and where she's talking with Libby, and it starts flashing back to her time in captivity with Ethan and the others. I don't know if I would really count that as a flashback as I would count this as a flashback, just because it's not pre-crash on the island. And then in Season 3, she has another flashback, and I don't think she has any flashbacks in Season 4. And, not a lot of people got flashbacks in Season 4. Maybe just, like, I know Juliet got one, probably just Juliet and Locke, I think, were the only people who actually got flashbacks, because I know Season 4 they were really focusing on flash forwards. Oh, and the freighter people, they got flashbacks and confirmed dead. So again, not a lot of flashbacks in Season 4. And then Season 6, there's only like 2 flashbacks in Season 6, because again, Season 6 was focused a lot more on the Flash Sideways, and I think Claire had a Flash Sideways episode, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. And again, Season 5, Claire wasn't even in Season 5, except for maybe like an episode or two. So it was one of the few flashback episodes we get for Claire. And I suppose there's really not much backstory we need for Claire. Kind of like all the important stuff is already kind of talked about in this episode, so there's almost, I don't really have that much to say about this episode. It's a good episode. It's good. This finally sets up Ethan as a villain, which I guess is something you could kind of say the show is lacking up until this point, is like a villain, because I guess earlier on in the Season 1, it's all about surviving and making do, making fire, finding water, this and that, dealing with each other. But now at this point, things have kind of settled down a little bit. They're kind of getting more and more used to the idea of being on this island. So now it feels like a good time to introduce a proper villain. Even though you have people who can create conflict, like Sawyer no way would be considered a villain as much as Ethan would be. So it's good. We get some more of Ethan. Something I didn't know about previously. Before watching this, I was looking up some theories and speculation about the character of Nathan that we meet in the other 48 days in Season 2. And one of the things I saw that was interesting is how every time Canada is referenced in the show, it's always in the basis of some type of deception. Because Nathan says he was from Canada. Now, we don't know that to be true, but that could point to deception being, that could point to Nathan lying about something. I mean, obviously we know now that Nathan was on the plane, but there was probably some more of Nathan's history or background that he was lying about or not saying about, whatever his reasons were for actually spending 2 hours in the jungle by himself. But I mentioned the lying about Canada because Ethan, when Ethan is talking to Hurley, Ethan mentions that he was that he's from Canada. I think he says Ontario. And obviously, again, this is also a deception. Now, I mean, at this point, there's no way we could know that, because it's not something that's established. This is, I guess, the first time, and they get peppered throughout the show. I guess later on, that's something that you could pick up on if you were like into Season 4 or 5. I can't think of any other specific examples off the top of my head, but I thought that was pretty interesting how Canada is linked to deception a lot of times in the show. So we don't like actually have a character who is legitimately from Canada, except possibly Nathan, if he was the only person telling the truth. Actually, no, I do remember Kate, in her first flashback to Bula Raza, she told the farmer guy that she was from Canada. So I guess that could be our first. But also we don't know specifically that Kate isn't from Canada until, I think, I want to say season 2, when we get to what Kate did, that episode where we finally see her earliest origin, so to speak. But anyway, that was one little tidbit I saw. This episode, and also anything really with Claire, is always interesting in retrospect when you think about, the fact that Kate and Jack are sisters. That's brother and sister, I should say. Because obviously we don't find that out until season 3. We get that reveal that Jack and Claire are half siblings. And also interesting about this episode, knowing further information, is Claire's mother isn't in the episode, but there are references to Claire's mother. And as we'll come to find out, at this point, Claire's mother is in a coma and has been for some time. So it's you can kind of see how they hadn't planned that out originally when they were making this episode. They hadn't planned out for Claire's mother. They had probably never intended to introduce Claire's mother, or maybe they figured they would get to that later. But I think the idea of Claire's mother being in a coma for so long is probably something that was introduced later on in the show, when they had to think of a good way to bring Christian Shepherd back into Claire's life so we could get that twist in season 3. And of course, we go so long without a proper Claire flashback that the topic of her mother doesn't come up again, because she doesn't have anything in season 2 and doesn't get another one in season 1. So it's really kind of like a mute point. But I did think that was pretty interesting. And we get the stuff with the psychic, Richard Malkin, who we find out later on with Mr. Echo's flashback. I don't know if it's his first one or his second one. Does he have 3? Mr. Echo might have 3 flashbacks. I don't know. I know he has question mark and the cost of living. I'm pretty sure he only has 2, but he might have 3. I don't really know. I don't remember. I should know this. He could have 2 in season 2. He does. He has the 23rd Psalm. So yeah, he does have 2 in season 2. So I would say in the second flashback, second Echo flashback, the second in season 2, question mark, that's when we find out that Richard Malkin is a fake psychic, even though he had these real visions in this episode, which when I think about it now, and this is something that you could probably always assume, knowing what we know, is that him having these visions or whatever about Claire and needing to be on 815, it's probably in some way related to Jacob. Jacob's probably behind this in some way, shape, or form. I was thinking like maybe Jacob could have visited this guy and told him what to say. And, maybe Jacob touched him, gave him like very, very, very specific vision powers. Maybe it's also possible that a twist of fate, this fake psychic does later on develop psychic powers. But no, because that's the reason he's in Australia. He's in Australia investigating the psychic. So he's a fake right before Claire gets on. Yeah, so no, I guess he couldn't develop into real. That would be interesting, but it's not actually what happens. It is Richard. Malkin, right? It's weird. Huh. I have a feeling it's not Richard Malkin, but I don't know why I'm thinking that. Because if it is, I never connected that there were two characters with the name Richard on the show, but... Anyway, I'm probably wrong, as I am known to be wrong about stuff on here. Yeah. We see Aaron's father, who the actor's name is, I think he's Keir O'Donnell, if I'm pronouncing that right. I have actually seen him in other things. I do like him in the stuff that I've seen. So a part of me always kind of thought that maybe we could have seen this guy at some point in time again. I guess he really doesn't matter. He's really not that significant to the overall story. But then again, he is kind of significant. You know, I mean, he's Aaron's biological father. And if Aaron is going to be any type of significant character in Lost, you can't avoid his biological father. But I'm sure there was no real effort or to work him back into the story. It doesn't really matter. But I just feel like that character could have been slightly more significant. It could have brought him back in some way. I mean, he could have showed up in Claire's flashback in season 3. We don't really know how long that they've known each other for, how long they've been dating before this happens. So yeah, like I said, I don't really have a lot to say about this episode. Some good Hurley moments where he's interrogating all these people. You get fun interactions between him and Sawyer. He's got funny little interaction between him and Locke, where Locke creeps him out. A fun little interaction between him and Shannon, where he's getting on Shannon's nerves. I think this is our first mention of Scott and Steve. Is it? Actually, I feel like it's not our first mention of Scott and Steve. Because I distinctly remember Michael yelling for Scott, and Scott's like, "I'm not Scott, I'm Steve, I'm Scott." Or somewhere. Who the hell knows who's Scott and who's Steve? I feel like that's done for a specific reason. I feel like I can talk about Scott and Steve at another point in a different video when they're more relevant, they're more relevant. They're hardly ever relevant, but there's a lot about Scott and Steve. So this might not be the first mention of Scott and Steve, but it's definitely something they're building towards. Somewhat of a running joke, which I guess Lost doesn't have a whole lot of running jokes. But yeah. So, like I said, there's not a whole lot. I'm still just trying to think of stuff. Like I said, it's nice seeing the interactions between Claire and Jack, knowing now that they are related. Thought that was nice. Obviously Claire was attacked by Ethan, wasn't really attacked by Ethan, but Ethan was in his own way trying to help, I suppose. There's a lot of interesting stuff to think about with Ethan, and he kind of went overboard a little bit with what he was doing. I feel like that's more I can talk about when I get to that season 2 episode I mentioned, because at this point, Ethan is really just this mysterious, psychotic enemy guy who just shows up out of nowhere and beating people up. He kills Scott and or Steve. He beats the crap out of Jack. So, Sayid comes back after being gone for a week apparently. I always wondered about time. Traveling from location to location on the island. How far did Sayid really wander the beach until he found that wire? I guess as shows transpire, as shows progress, I feel like shows eventually stop caring more and more about, traveling time between locations. Like maybe this 1 week of Saeed being gone was a little overcompensation, but you see it, for example, like Game of Thrones. Towards the end of Game of Thrones, people are just like straight up teleporting from location to location practically. When like earlier on, they take like they spend a whole episode on the road just trying to get to the place they're going in season 1. So I feel like shows get a little lazier. Shows tend to get a little lazier when it comes to traveling distance and traveling time, but it's not that big of a deal. With Lost, it's almost just something that's not really mentioned because there aren't a lot of set locations and landmarks, and there's no map of the island, so it's not that big of a deal. But I think it's going to be something that I'll look out, something that I'll look for going forward when I rewatch some of these episodes again. But until then, I guess I will see you guys next time.